So I'm Dr. Judy Wolman, and I'm a psychologist in the Sandy Springs area. Been in practice for about almost 40 years now. And I was in the school system for about 10 years before that. So it's been a long time.
How did you get started with testing children with dyslexia and working with their families?
So I actually was originally a learning disabilities teacher. I taught children who were dyslexic and had the opportunity during that period of time to watch psychologists through a two-way mirror doing assessments. And I just was fascinated by the whole process of assessment and decided that that would be something I'd like to do. So I began slowly working my way towards a PhD in school psychology.
Could you talk about the process with parents and children and the testing? How does that start and how does it end?
So usually what happens is parents are beginning to become aware. And I actually think sometimes parents, their gut is very good, and they are sometimes the first person to realize that something's not working well for their child. I always encourage parents to trust their gut. And so parents start noticing that they feel their child is not doing as well as they would expect. And they usually will begin talking to a teacher. And sometimes the teacher might say, oh, it's coming along. And that's where I would say to parents, trust your own instinct. If you feel like this is just, you see your child struggling at home, you see the frustration, trust yourself. At that point, depending on if the parent is trying to work within the school system or if they're going for a private assessment, there are a couple of different sort of tracks to go on. If they're trying to work within the public school, they actually the governor just signed in Georgia that in 2 years, they will be assessing all children, I think from kindergarten through third grade, to look for dyslexia, but we're doing some catching up in the public schools. And so I would encourage that parent to go and talk with the student support team at the school and just keep pushing. I do think parents sometimes need to push to say, I'm not comfortable, I want more information on how my child's learning. If a parent is able to go privately, either through their insurance or their own self-pay, then they're able to get a recommendation from a pediatrician, from a speech language pathologist, from sometimes actually friends who've been through the process, and get names of psychologists that are well respected. I will often say contact private schools for students with learning disabilities, with dyslexia, and ask those schools to give you a list of people that write reports that are helpful in getting children the right support. At that point, a parent will contact me and we'll talk about the process of testing.
Thank you. All right. Next question. Can you talk about the effects of dyslexia on a child's mindset, such as self-confidence?
Yeah, absolutely. I think a dyslexic child is often also well aware that something is not right. And sitting in a class and trying so hard to read and feeling frustrated, it's very upsetting to a child, because they know. I think kids are also mom and dad instinct, and the child themselves often are the first folks to realize that something's not right. And working hard to do something and not feeling successful, it's awfully hard to keep persisting with that.
All right. So next question. After testing, you kind of touched this a little bit, but would you say are there any more typical next steps for parents?
Sure. The testing process, by the way, just so you'll know what's involved, it does involve looking at a child's intellectual functioning so that you can get a good sense of their strengths and weaknesses, how they seem to learn the best. There's usually a very thorough look at their learning, their reading, and other subjects, their math, their spelling, their writing, to see what kind of, again, strength and weakness pattern begins to emerge. It's always important to look at a child's social emotional functioning to see what's happening there, and attention concentration, because all those factors, it's not like we can just look at one piece of a child. In fact, sometimes people will call and say, can you just test reading? And I always say it's kind of like the blind men and the elephant. If you just touch the tail, you're going to say it's a snake, and you totally miss the elephant. So I will never do an assessment on a child that looks at only one piece of their functioning. I have to look at the whole child to see what their strengths are, what their weaknesses are. Is there a dyslexic profile? Are there other factors going on, and what do we need to do to be helpful? If a child is in the public school and they do get testing through the public school, They're going to have something called a staffing to sit and discuss what the services are at the school. Sometimes, I can remember in the years that I was in the public school system, we would say, it's wonderful, they're not meeting criteria, but that sometimes didn't mean that the child wasn't still dyslexic. The federal criteria really serves kids that are more moderate to severe. That doesn't mean that there isn't sometimes a mild issue. So I think it's also important for parents to realize that when they go to one of those meetings, they're told, oh, they don't meet criteria, that might not mean that they're not still dyslexic. And in the private sector, we're able to sometimes help parents get connected with tutors who have special training in working with kids with dyslexia. And there are many schools in the area that are private. Some of them do have support, some financial support to help kids who cannot afford those tuitions to get that support. And if parents cannot do it, there's not good support offered. There is something, by the way, called SB 10 money, State Bill 10, which is if a child meets criteria in the public school and they're receiving an individual education plan, but the parent really wants to take that money with them to a private setting, they can apply to take their SB 10 money with them because the child met criteria for services in the public school. Sometimes people don't know about that.
Does the SB money, could that be used to test the child? Or
No,
they have to be
cannot.
tested to be provided that money?
Yes,
Okay.
exactly. Good question.
And how long does the testing usually take?
So in our office, if we're testing a youngster who is in kindergarten or below, we're usually going to spend about 5 separate hours with that child. If the child is in first grade through about 4th or 5th grade, we're going to spend about 5.5 hours, and we're going to break it into pieces, like a 2.5 hour and 3 hour setting. By middle school, it takes a little longer because there's so much more that you have to assess.
Right.
It's usually a 6-hour assessment. In our high school and adults, college and adults are usually about 6.5 hours, not in one day ever. And then there's an hour and a half that we spend with the parents, and in high school with the students also, going over those results. And then we do charge an hour and a half of time to do a written report. It's like about a 25, 30-page report that can be used either for public or private schools.
I would just want to leave it open for you if there's anything that you feel like would benefit teachers or parents who are currently going through their dyslexia journey now, or students who are just curious. If there's anything you think might be useful for them.
Absolutely. I think probably the important thing is to help everybody understand what is dyslexia, because I think there was always this belief that if you reversed letters, if you reversed B and D, or if you were dyslexic, then you would look at the word was and see saw. That's actually not correct. It's not really a visual reversal. What dyslexia is really much more of a retrieval difficulty, that when the student is beginning to learn the sounds that go with letters, they're having to retrieve, when they see that print letter, the sound that goes with it. And when they're trying to then, for example, read the word bat, they have to retrieve the b, retrieve the a sound, retrieve the t sound, blend it together to make bat. And that's called decoding. When the student is then trying to write the word bat, they have to again retrieve, I want bat, but how do I make the letter how do I form the how do I form the t, and then I've got the word bat. What happens for the dyslexic child is when they work their way very slowly through that process, the next page, when they see it again, they have to do it again. They don't have like an automaticity that develops every time they see that combination of letters. So it's very painstaking. It takes a lot of energy, a lot of effort. And that is what dyslexia is. It's the decoding for the words of reading and encoding to put it back into code for spelling. And when that breaks down, that is what is dyslexia. Okay.
Yeah, that is 100% right. When I tell people I'm dyslexic, they say, oh, you have trouble reading. I'm like, well, it's more than that. There's memorization problems, there's spelling problems, and then there's also the reading problems. So that's definitely right.
And sometimes, I don't know if this relates for you, but sometimes actually it impacts math too.
Yeah.
Because retrieval of like 3 + 5 is 8 is retrieval,
Yeah.
and remembering which way this, the different numerals go, and getting all that onto paper can be tricky too. Sometimes my dyslexic
Yeah.
kids get confused in the steps. They're in the middle of multiplying 21 times 7, and they forget what are the steps for going through that process. So dyslexia can affect much more than just reading.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
So thank you so much, Dr. Wolman, for letting me interview you today. This is
Absolutely.
so helpful and so knowledgeable for so many people out there.